All right, recording has been started. All right, so tonight agenda is we are first going to cover the cursors, and then after that we get started with start procedures. All right, so have you heard about something called as a cursor in SQL Server or in any relational database management system? What is a cursor? Cursor is nothing but a preload. Yes, please go ahead. What is a cursor?
Set of code which is pinned in memory, and whenever required you can open it or close it, like use it.
All
You
right.
can call it to use those set of SQL statements.
Yes, it's not the SQL statement. It's actually the record set
Statements
itself.
required.
All right. So cursor is nothing but a preloaded record set in memory. So that is what the cursor is. So you need to when you're in your if your requirement is or in order to satisfy your requirement, if you want to preload certain number of records into memory, and then you want to loop through each of those record, and for each record you want to perform some action or task, that is when cursor is going to be used. So cursor itself is nothing but a preloaded record set in memory, which will allow you to loop through individual record in that record set. So if I want to declare, I mentioned that cursor is nothing but a record set in memory. So if you want to do something if you want to create something in memory, that definitely going to be a variable. So cursor can also be considered as a variable, or it's in memory, so it's also considered as a variable with tabular structure. So if I want to create a cursor, well, you need to declare the cursor first. So declare followed by the name of the cursor. So always start with the first three character indicates it is cursor, and my intention is that I want to loop through all the employees in my office. So I'm going to say cursor. This is my cursor name is CUR employee. Now after that, you need to what is going to be the data type. Normally you say declare followed by a variable name followed by the data type. So here the data type is cursor. Now if you look, can you tell me what is the difference between a normal variable declaration and a cursor declaration? What kind of difference you see a normal cursor declaration and a variable declaration?
In the variable declaration, we write the declare variable name and data type. And in the cursor, we are writing the cursor.
Well, you can see that there is a at sign missing, because if you are declaring a variable, the variable always prefix with a at symbol, right? But when you're declaring a cursor, you don't really need to do that. So if you put the at sign, SQL engine think that that is a variable instead of a cursor. So do not put a at sign in front of the cursor name. Now after that, you need to say for, you need to declare, or you need to specify the select statement responsible for loading record into the CUR underscore employee. So select, let's see, select, I'm going to put a star here, but I'm going to change that shortly.
Can you please repeat the difference between variable and normal?
Oh, in the variable you prefix with the at symbol, but cursor you are not going to use the at symbol.
All right, thank you.
Human resource dot employee. All right, so I want to employee ID, I want to have title, and I want to have vacation. I mean, I selected a couple of columns here. So when this statement get executed, it is going to create a memory location called as CUR underscore employee, which is nothing but a cursor. And then whatever the outcome of the output of that select statement, that is what going to be loaded into CUR underscore employee. Now this select statement can be anything. It contains inner joins, outer joins, whatever options we have seen with the select clause, all those can be used with this select statement, no restriction. All right. Now, once the cursor is created and records are loaded, I mean, if I execute this statement separately, how many records we have? 290 records will be loaded into memory, right? Into the cursor. Now, I mentioned that cursor is nothing but a a in-memory record set loaded by a select statement, and then that is also the cursor will also let you loop through those records in that memory location. So if before I start the looping, we need to open the cursor. So if you want to open the cursor, the syntax for that is open followed by open cursor followed by the name of the cursor. All right, so you open the cursor. So I'm going to, so the usage of cursor consists of 5 different steps. The first one is declare the cursor, right? Step number 1 is declare the cursor. Step number 2 is open the cursor. Step number 3 is fetch the first record from the cursor. All right. So if I want to get the first record from the cursor, the statement you need to use for that is, I'm sorry, there's no need to say open cursor. You can just say open followed by the cursor name. All right. So if I want to retrieve data from the first record in that cursor, the syntax for that is fetch next followed by the name of the cursor. Now, when you are saying fetch next from CUR underscore employee, it is going to read the first record from the cursor, and then after that, you need to specifically say to which particular variable that value is going to be going to. So it is going to be into, followed by you need to specify the receiving variable. We'll be talking about the receiving variable. So when you are executing this statement, fetch next from CUR employee, it is going to read the first record from that cursor. Now, when SQL Engine read the first record from the cursor, what are the 3 different values it is going to read? When SQL Engine read the first record from CUR underscore employee, what are the 3 values it is going to read? Employee ID. So we need
Title and vacation hours.
Right. So we need to store that information somewhere. So we need to declare a receiving variable. I just say receiving variable because that is the purpose of that variable, but it is nothing but a normal variable. All right. So declare, I'm going to say int employee ID. It is going to be an integer, and declare at str title. And the last one is declare int vacation hours. All right, so that's going to be an integer. All right. Now we need to assign this. We need to specifically say which column goes to which, which variable. So employee ID, the first column goes to the employee ID variable. The second column value goes to str title. The third one goes to vacation hours. All right. Let me save this. Okay. So what we did so far is step number 1, we declared the cursor. Step number 2, we opened the cursor. Step number 3, we retrieved the first record from the cursor by saying fetch next from cursor. So when you are, the fetch statement is the statement responsible for reading record from the cursor. Now, there are different version of fetch statement. You can say fetch next, fetch last, first, pre, absolute, relative. There are different versions of fetch statement. We'll be seeing that very shortly. So we read the first record from the cursor. Now, how do we loop through this cursor? Because the step number 3 let you read the first record from the cursor. Okay, that's fine. But I want to loop through all the record. How do I make sure that this cursor is going to be looped? Well, what is the looping? What is the looping syntax in SQL Server? That's going to be the while loop. So if you, yes, so if you want to loop perform a looping in SQL Server, the syntax for that is the while loop. So when you're giving the while loop, you also need to specify because anytime when you are performing a looping, there should be an exit condition. Otherwise, it is going to be in an infinite loop, right? So when you are performing any kind of looping, doesn't matter whether you are using while loop or some other looping technique in any other programming language. When you're performing a looping, make sure that there is an exit condition. So the syntax for the while is, along with that while, you need to specify a condition which as long as that condition is going to be true, it is going to be in that loop. So if I say this is a good 1 equals 1, so that is a true condition all the time. So this is not something we always give. So but you need to provide a condition like this. So here the condition, even if you want to loop through the cursor, it is a universal condition which is fetch status equals 0. So we will see what that fetch status. So if you see something with a 2 ampersand, what does that mean?
System variable.
It's a system variable. Okay, system variable. Now, every time the purpose of this fetch status is system variable, the value in this fetch status variable is what is going to be the result of the previous fetch statement. If the previous fetch next statement is a successful one, the value of the fetch status is going to be 0. If the previous fetch statement is not a successful one, it is going to have a value of -1. Okay. So if you are checking whether the fetch status equals 0, that means the previous fetch statement is successful. So then it is going to execute that loop one more time. So this loop is going to be executed until or as long as the fetch status equals 0. So when after reading the first record from the cursor, now let's say I created a cursor without any record, but the select statement did not return any records back. Okay, just assume that when I execute this highlighted select statement did not get any record back. That means the cursor doesn't have any records, right? So if the cursor doesn't have any record, and then when the first fetch statement get executed, what would be the value of the fetch status?
-1.
-1.
-1.
So if it is -1 and then it is going to hit this while loop, well, do you think this condition is true? Fetch status equals 0, that is a false condition, right? Because the value in that fetch status is -1. So it is not going to get into that while loop. Instead of that, it is going to skip that. Okay, so that is what the purpose is. So if there's no record, that it is not even, the SQL engine will not even get into that looping. In order to get into that looping, you need to have at least one record in that cursor. So if you have, let's say I have 5 records in that cursor. For the first record, that the fetch status is going to be 0. Second record, the fetch status is going to be 0. So it keep on going like that for 5. On the 6th time, when it is trying to loop, the value is going to be -1. So it is going to exit out. So this is the looping. So step number 4 is looping. Okay. Now the most important thing is that inside the loop, how do we tell the SQL engine to read the next record? Because inside the loop, you need to read. Okay, let me show you this. So inside this, I want to print. For this particular example, only thing I'm trying to do is just display the employee ID, the title, and the vacation hours. So I say print, and we are doing a string concatenation here. So we definitely need to cast it. Plus, and str string is already a varchar, so no need to convert that. Plus int vacation hours. All right. So it's going to print the first record. Now after printing the first records, employee ID, title, and vacation hours, how do we tell the SQL engine read the next record? If I want to tell the SQL engine to read the next record, it is going to be another fetch statement. Please mute the microphone, a lot of noise. Might need to use a headphone set with microphone. All right. So this is a very, very important statement, because if I don't provide this statement, what would be the end result? If I don't provide this fetchness statement inside the while loop, what would be the end result?
Minus
It's going to be an
in the first record.
yes, it's going to be an infinite loop, because it is never going to read the second record. As long as it is not reading the second record, this condition is going to be true. So it is going to be in an infinite loop. So never ever miss providing this value. So this is the step number 4. Now, so it is going to loop through, and then on the 6th record, I mean, we have 290 records, right? When the SQL engine perform the 291st looping, that is when the fetch status is going to be -1, because there's no more records to be read. So if there's no more records to be read, then the fetch status value is going to be -1. So the while loop is not true. It is come out from that while loop. So once after looping through all the records in this cursor, you need to close the cursor. Close followed by the name of the cursor. So this is going to be step number 5. And once closing the cursor doesn't mean that it is going to release that memory space. So if you want to forcefully ask the SQL engine to release that memory allocated to that cursor, you need to say deallocate the cursor name. So at that time, that memory location is going to be released. It can be used for something else. So these are the difference. There are 6 different steps. In any cursor, there is going to be 6 different steps. First, you declare the cursor. Number 2, you open it. Number 3, you fetch the first record. Then number 4, you perform a looping. And number 5, close the cursor and deallocate the cursor. Okay. All right, let's see. Hold on a second. I'm going to unmute those who came late. Muhammad, you have been unmuted. All right, so now let's go and execute this cursor to get a better understanding how this cursor is going to work. Here we go. Well, we got an error. We need to look into why we got an error. Incorrect syntax.
because we have 3 brackets over there. Yeah.
All right, so let's execute it again. All right, you can see. Well, we forgot to put a dash in between the title and the vacation hours, so it's my mistake. All right. Any questions? You can see it's scanning, it's looping through. How many times it is going to be looping through? We have 290 records. So 290 plus 1, because the next one is going to generate an error, right? So total of, well, no, it's actually 290 times it is going to be looped, because the first record is already read. So there are 289 records need to be read in that looping. And then after that, when SQL engine go for the 290th time in that loop, it is going to know that there's no more records need to be read. So the fetch status value is going to be -1. Okay.
Anyway,
Yes.
before while loop, it's a fetch next part. So it looks like when you open a cursor, it does not point to a first record in the table. Is that true?
No, I'm sorry. Which one? The fetch next?
Yeah, before a while loop you have a fetch next, so it looks like so when you open a cursor it does not point to a first record.
It is always going to point to the first record. When you are opening a cursor in SQL Server, by default, it is always going to point to the first record.
But before a while loop you said fetch next, so that it should go to the second record, right?
Yes, in the loop, looping is going to start for the second record because the first record is already read. So when SQL Engine perform the looping, when inside that loop, when is the so it read the first record here and then go inside the loop, it is going to print that, and then when SQL Engine execute the line number 25 for the first time, it is going to read the second record.
Okay, I got it.
Mhm. Now fetch next is one of the fetch statement. In addition to the fetch next, there is going to be other fetch statements, so you need to remember, you need to understand the difference because this is a certification question as well. So the difference between these syntax, these commands are, let me show it here. So we know the fetch next, that means it is always going to retrieve the next record in line. Okay. Now fetch prior means at any point if you want to read the previous record, then that is going to be the fetch previous. Okay. Now, if you want to go back, for example, you are looping through this 290 records. At one point, you decide that, okay, I want to go back and read the first record. You can also say fetch first. If you want to read the last one, you can say fetch last. Now, the interview question is, what is the difference between fetch absolute and fetch relative? Anybody know what is the fetch absolute and fetch relative?
Should that be like absolute value?
Yes. So if you are, I am looping through this record set, and if you are in, let's say, record number 50, while you are in record number 50, the next statement is fetch absolute 10. What is then, which record it is going to be read? When you are in record 50, and then after that, you say fetch absolute 10. Which record is going to be read? Which one?
10.
10, yes. It is going to be 10. But if I say, if you are in record number 50, and if you say fetch relative of 10, which record it is going to be reading?
60.
60, all right? So absolute means the absolute position of the record. Now relative means whatever the current record it just read, related to that, read the 10th record. So 50 plus 10, that is going to be 60. If you say fetch relative of negative 10, it is going to read the 40th record. Clear what is the difference between fetch absolute and fetch relative?
Can you please repeat, Daniel, the difference between?
The fetch absolute means the absolute position of the record. If I say fetch absolute of 10, I'm telling the SQL engine read the 10th record in that cursor. If I say fetch absolute of 100, I'm telling that, okay, read the 100th record in this cursor. But if I say fetch relative of 100, let's say that depends on what is the current position of the cursor. If the cursor just read the 50th record and after that the next statement I execute is fetch relative of 100, that is going to be 50 plus 100. The 150th record is what it is going to read. Clear?
Yeah.
All right. So this is a general syntax of creating a cursor. Now, what is the need of a cursor? What you are trying to achieve from using a cursor? I mean, we are not going to use the cursor just to print the employee ID and the vacation hours and the title. That's not the purpose. So if you want to loop through if you want to preload records, and then for each record in that cursor, if you want to perform some action or calculation, something like that, a task, that is when the cursor is going to be used. So instead of that print statement, you can do whatever you want. if you want to check the vacation hours, and then if it is between certain range, increase that by 2. If it is certain range, another range, then increase by 3. So if you want to do those kind of calculation, then the cursor is going to be a very effective tool. So let's do a quick example here. My requirement is that if the vacation hours of an employee is between 10 to 15, I want to add 3 more hours to that. Okay, so let's do that. So if, well, we already know the vacation hours, right? So for each employee, so if the current vacation hour is greater than, I can say current vacation hour is less than 15. Okay, less than or equal to 15. Then I want to declare another variable here. Hold on a second, guys. Oh, I don't need to. I can do a, so it's going to be begin and end. All right, so if the vacation hours is less than 15, I want to update the vacation hours. So update, then table name is human resource dot employee, set vacation hours equals vacation hours plus, let's say 3, where, because this is for this particular employee, right? Where employee ID equals whatever that employee ID in looping, and we also need to make sure that the vacation hours is, I mean, this is fine. All right, because we're already checking what is a vacation hour, so you don't really need to do anything. So if the current employee's vacation hour is less than 15, I want to add it by 3. Now, if it is 15 to, if it is greater than 15 and vacation IND vacation hours is, please mute the microphone, less than 20, less than or equal to 20. If you have any question, please ask. Okay. All right. I want to add 2, and for rest of the employees, we want to add 1. So that's what the logic is.
Yeah, but you say vacation hours equal to human resources dot employee plus 3. Shouldn't that be equals to vacation hours plus
Yes,
3?
that is my mistake. Yes. Yes, that is my mistake. I apologize for that. Vacation hours plus 2. So this is going to be 1, and this is going to be vacation hours. Yes, Yusuf. All right, so we have 3 conditions here, and now if you want to add some kind of a log, I mean some kind of a message saying how many vacation hours are added for each employee, then I can perform some print. I can provide a print statement here. I can say print employee ID, which is going to be this. So cast 3 more hours added. Two more hours. more hour added. All right, so now if you want to put this inside a transaction, is it possible I can put all these things? Because if I don't put everything inside a single transaction, each of this update is going to be its own transaction, right? Well, that I will come back and do it later. So here you go. Let me go and execute this. All right, employee ID 1, most of the case, I mean, if you look at employee ID 3, you can see 3 more hours are added. Keep on going like that, okay? Now, if I want to put this inside a transaction, where you are going to start the transaction? If I want to put inside a transaction, where do you stand? Where do you start the transaction? Is it going to be inside the while loop, or is it going to be outside the while loop?
Outside.
Outside, definitely going to be outside. So I will say begin transaction. I mean, that's what you are going to do. But we normally don't use that begin tran and then commit and roll back, all those things in one single sequence. So what is going to be the actual syntax, or the better way to declare and use a transaction? The try catch method, right?
Right.
Yes, we need to perform a try catch here. All right, so if you want to perform a try catch, well, this entire while loop is going to be inside the try section. Am I correct? All right, so let's do this. So begin try. End try, and then begin catch
And
and catch. And then, I mean, I can say
roll back.
roll back. You can become more fancier, when you get a chance. But all right, I just want to print something here. So print, or just raise an error, okay? Because if you're using the try catch, if something goes wrong, the SQL engine is not going to display the error. So I want to display something here. So razor, something went wrong.
Daniel, raise error before the rollback transaction or after the rollback?
This doesn't matter where you provide that. It's still going to raise that error. Something went wrong in the try section. All right. Now, well, we are rolling back the transaction, but we haven't defined the transaction here yet, right? So inside the begin try, well, the first thing we need to do is begin transaction, right? And if everything goes fine, before the try ends, or before the end try, we need to commit transaction. Right, guys? Here you go. So now if you look at here, you can see that looping is actually performed inside the try catch method, right? Now there's one more thing. If something goes wrong, okay, if the SQL engine pass the control to the catch section, and after executing the catch section, do you think it is going to execute the step number 4 and step number 5? The control will be transferred. It will. I mean, after the catch section is executed, definitely it is going to continue with whatever the statement below that. All right, so let me execute this one more time. So you get the same result. It's slightly different result because last time we updated a lot of records. So some of the record which we were getting 2 hours, now most likely going to be 1 record. All right. Clear, guys? Any question on cursor?
Daniel,
Yes.
when you execute, I saw 1 hour dated. I mean, one more hour dated. What added? I mean, what does mean that? I mean, before you executed or you already existed the
Which one?
update, the message. I mean, under the message.
This one?
No, under the message when you executed the result. I mean.
Okay, this part, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
One more
it,
hour added.
uh-huh.
Oh,
What
that's
does mean?
something because inside the try catch, I just want to print some statement for employee ID 1, how many hours are added. So what I did is that after each update, I'm going to print the whatever that particular employee ID and the total number of hours added. So for example, employee ID 1, the number of hours added is 1 because that is actually the result of this print statement.
Okay.
This is just for the debugging purpose. You don't need to provide that.
Okay.
Daniel, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Why we use here try catch method? I'm not getting this.
Well, we always do that. If you want to implement a transaction, we always go for the try catch, right? That's
Yes,
mhm,
that's fine.
that's the reason.
Okay.
All right. Now, one of the problem with cursor is when you are working in when you are working with cursors, one of the first question you might come across is how you are handling the performance issues with the cursor. Now,
Releasing memory, deallocating space,
yes,
closing it.
just a second. All right. So when you are loading the cursor, I mean, for in this case, it's not a big deal because we are only loading 290 records, not a deal, not a big deal. Now, if you have a situation where you have a cursor which is loading, 100,000, 200,000, millions of records, that is when the problem is. The problem is because of two reasons. When you are creating a cursor, the cursor you are creating by default, the cursor you are creating is called as an updatable cursor. What is an updatable cursor? It's a common interview question. What is an updatable cursor? Updatable cursor means the base table of that cursor can be updated through the cursor itself. So if what is the base table? Human resource dot employee, right? Right?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm
Yeah.
saying, if it's by default, it is going to be an updatable cursor because that base table column values can be updated through the cursor. Now let me tell you this: we never want to do that because it always comes with a lot of performance issues. You never come across a situation. The reason why all the RDBMS still support updatable cursor because it is part of the ANSI 92 standard. You never come across a situation where you want to update the cursor, you update the base table through a cursor, but it is supported as per ANSI 92 standard. Now, but there is a problem with this updatable cursor. Even if you are not, even if you don't have any plan to update the base table through the cursor, see what behind the scenes SQL engine is going to put a lock on that base table records until you close the cursor and deallocate it. For example, when I execute this cursor, it is going to put an exclusive lock off for that 290 records read by that cursor until I loop through and close that cursor. Do you think that's a good strategy?
No.
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 Okay. So that's a drawback of a updatable cursor, and by default, unfortunately, by default, all the cursors in SQL Server by default it's an updatable cursor. Now there is a way you can make it as a read-only cursor. So if you, it's all, I mean, in any production environment, if you see a cursor, you will see that it is a read-only cursor. So if you want to make a cursor a read-only cursor, Only thing you need to do is just say, after the keyword cursor, you say read only. When you say read only, it is going to read those records from human resource.employee, and there is no exclusive lock on those records read by that particular cursor. So if your intention is, if you don't have any intention to update the base table records, always go for read-only cursor. That's one way you can really enhance the performance of your cursor. And not only your cursor, you also not going to, the cursor is also not going to create unnecessarily wait for other transactions executing at the same time. Okay, that's what the read-only. Now,
Daniel,
yes.
when you make a read-only, it's like a select statement, right?
Select, I'm sorry, I did not hear the second part. Select.
When you make a read-only, it's like a select statement, right?
Yeah, it's a select statement. So that select statement get executed, and whatever the record satisfy that select statement will be loaded into the cursor. Now, if you don't specify the read-only, that means it is an updatable cursor. So the record is still loaded into the cursor, but there is going to be an exclusive lock for SQL engine is going to put on those records from that base table, and that base table lock is going to be released only when you close the cursor and deallocate it.
Why we need a specific memory allocation for working on the cursor?
I'm sorry, why specific memory allocation?
Is needed to work on cursors.
Yeah, what is a cursor? Cursor is nothing but a in-memory variable, right? Behind the scene, cursor is nothing but a in-memory variable which is having a tabular structure. Is that what you asked me? Or maybe I misunderstood the question. If that's not what you asked, please let me know. I can.
Daniel?
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead. Okay.
Why we need a specific memory allocation when we work on cursor, or by definition it is the memory allocation by itself?
By itself. When you say declare followed by the cursor name, the SQL engine will automatically allocate that memory for the cursor.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, like
Okay.
any other variable you say declare followed by the variable name, the memory allocation happens by the SQL, this memory will be allocated by the SQL engine. Yes.
My question is, what's the need of, the cursor? What's the use of the cursor?
The cursor, the use of the cursor is if you have a requirement where you want to loop through a record set, and then for each record in that record set, you want to perform some action, that is when cursor is going to be used.
Daniel, in the case of function and view, like we say create function before the name, but in this case, we get the name before we do the cursor. If we reverse it, like say declare cursor, call employee, will it still work?
Okay, what is that syntax you say? Declare cursor?
Like, yes. Just like we say create function before we give the name. So if we switch this, declare cursor, then before the name, will it still work?
No, it is not going to. It's because what is a cursor? Cursor is not a persistent object. The function is a persistent object. That's why it's a create followed by the what type of object you are trying to create. That's a function followed by the name of the function. But the cursor is not a persistent object. It is something created in memory. So that's the reason why the create statement doesn't work.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right.
So after looking to the result, we don't get it back again, this cursor.
We don't get
since it is not for a persistent object in the database.
Oh yeah, it's only
that
for
like it's a
during the execution, the cursor is going to be created. Open the cursor, read the first record, loop through it, and then at the end, you are going to close the cursor and deallocate it, and there is no more trace of that cursor available on the database. That's why I say it's not persistent. It's only in memory for a shorter period of time.
Daniel, once the records are loaded in the cursor, and after that someone update the table, so the update will be made in the memory.
No, it is not going to reflect that because it depends on what kind of cursor it is. Now, if we are going to stick with the default cursor, which is updatable cursor, well, the record get loaded in. Let's say it's an updatable cursor. Okay, I loaded this
Okay.
290 records into memory. Well, if that's the scenario, then nobody can update those records because the cursor already put an exclusive lock on that 290 records, so
Table.
no one else can modify the base table records. Now,
Okay.
if it is a read-only cursor, then after loading records into memory into the cursor, the connection between the base table and the cursor is not there. So other users can make changes in the base table, but that is not going to be reflected
In the
in
cursor.
the cursor.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
So that's a read-only cursor. Now, let's say, I mean, in this case, looping through is very simple. We have only 290 records. But think about a scenario where you have 1 million records in the cursor. You want to loop through that. And your intention is you want to loop through for each record in that cursor. You want to perform some action. Okay. Now you read the first record in the cursor. You perform that action. Then you move to the second record, third record, keep on going like that. Now my question is, if the first record in the cursor is already processed and you don't have any intention to go back and read the first record or any of the previous records which is already been read, what is the point? Why we still keep that in the cursor, right? Those records can be deleted from the cursor. What do you think? If I have a list of item and if let's say I have a to-do list, if the first item in that list is done, I can remove that from the list, right? Why you want to keep it again? Do you understand my question?
No.
If you, in the case of a cursor, if my intention is that I want to loop through the cursor, so if I take the first, when the cursor, I open the cursor, I read the first record in that cursor and then perform whatever task needed to be done for that first record, then I'm moving on to the second record in the cursor, keep on going like that. Okay. Now my question is that if the first record is being read and processed, what is the need of keeping that record as part of the cursor? We don't need it anymore, right? Because it's already been read and processed. So if you want to remove a record which is already been read and processed, in that scenario you can call it, you can add one more, you can make it as a forward only cursor. All right, forward only. So when you say forward only, you are telling the SQL engine that the moment a record from that cursor is read and processed, just delete that record. We don't need it anymore. Now, only problem is that if your cursor is a forward only cursor, you cannot perform. And the only statement supported is the fetch last and fetch next. You cannot say fetch prior, fetch first, fetch absolute, fetch relative. None of these fetch statements are possible. The only fetch statement supported for a forward only cursor is the next, the fetch next and the fetch last. Okay. Now, so the advantage you will see with the forward. Yes.
So the fetch absolute can go only back if we are reading the 50th record right now, and we said fetch absolute 10, so it will go to 10. And 10. If we say fetch absolute 60, it will go to number 60? No.
Number 60, oh. Yes, yes.
So in that case, in the forward only, it should work, right?
Yes, in the case of forward only, the absolute doesn't work because there is a chance that you can refer back to one of the record which is already been read and been deleted.
Okay.
So that's the reason why it's not supported in a forward only cursor.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Channel means read only. We can use only one time if we did a forward only. And if we want to use a second time this cursor, then?
Well, if you just use the read only, you can always go back and then read it. If you say read only and forward only, that means you can never go back. It's like a one-time use. You read the record, process it, and that record will be immediately removed from the cursor, so you cannot go back. So if you just say read only without a forward only, you're not specifying the forward only, just specifying the read only, you can always go back and read the previous records in the cursor.
No, I am saying if we use forward only, then one time if I just perform any query, and then one time I use cursor, and then second time if I perform the query and I have to use, then we can use it or not.
Second time you are going to create the cursor again?
No, if we use in another query and another day, then we can use it.
Because cursor is not persistent. It is cursor is not persistent. This cursor is available only for that particular, and the cursor is going to be removed and deallocated when that close and deallocate statement get executed. The cursor, whatever record you load into that cursor, is not going to be persistent one. It is going to be removed when you execute the step number 5 and step number 6. It is not persistent. So you cannot preserve it and then use it for another day. No.
Oh, I cannot? Okay.
No, it is not persistent.
Or if we are not step 5 and step 6, then we can use it, right?
I'm sorry, I did not hear that. What did you say?
If we not performing step 5 and step 6, then we can use it, but it takes too much memory, right?
Well, it's not about the memory. Then, I mean, it is, you can, if, for example, if I'm not using the close and deallocate, yes, it is going to be in memory, but again, that is only available for this particular connection. Tomorrow, if you come back and then execute, try to process CUR underscore employee from another connection, it is not going to work. The scope of that cursor is only for that particular connection.
Okay, now I got it.
If you open another connection and try to do a fetch statement on CUR underscore employee, it is not going to work.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know why. Go ahead.
Thank you. Then you have like right now read only, forward only. If you just use forward only, would that be updatable cursor if you don't use read only?
No, you cannot. That's a good question. If you are using the forward only, you always need to specify the read only as well. You cannot use just the forward only, because the problem with the reason why you cannot have something like this, because if the SQL engine will let you do this, that means after each statement, after reading each record, that record is going to be deleted. But it is a updatable cursor, so if a record get deleted from the cursor, that record will automatically deleted from the base table as well, right? Because it is an updatable cursor if you don't specify read only. So that's the reason why SQL engine will not let you do that. So if you want to specify the forward only, the cursor also has to be a read only cursor.
Okay.
We have something on the chat window. Let's take a look. All right. Thank you, Yusuf. I believe somebody else is having a question. Please go ahead.
Okay, when we use this updatable cursor, can we update this base table which is persistent in the database?
Well, that's what I said first. I mean, by default, it's an updatable cursor. In my life, I never used a cursor to update the base table. I never came across a situation where I need to use a cursor. I mean, if you look at here, I am actually updating the base table, right? If you look at the try catch method, am I updating the base table?
Yes.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that I really need to use that. I really want to make that cursor an updatable cursor. You can still make that cursor a read only, and then you can execute separate update statement if you want to update the base table. So that's more convenient. That's going to give you more options than making a cursor an updatable cursor and then updating the base table records or base table data through the cursor. That is not a convenient method of doing it. So that's the reason why even if you really want to update the base table, you are not going to make that cursor an updatable cursor.
I didn't get why we are working on cursors. That is why I asked this.
I'm sorry, I did not get that. Can you come over again, that question? The last one is just
So why we need a cursor in the database now in the SQL?
well, the reason why we need to have a cursor in the database, because if you want to have a scenario where you want to loop through the records, because the cursor is the only option available in cursor which is going to preload certain records, and for then you can loop through the records, right? So in this example, what I want is that I want to check each employee, and if the employee is having a specific vacation hours, I want to add a specific number of hours to that employee's vacation, right? And in addition to that, I also want to print a statement saying that how many vacation hours are added for each employee. So if you want to do something like that, that's when the cursor is going to be used.
Okay, thanks.
Daniel?
Yes?
In a working environment, how often are we going to be coming across this cursor thing?
We are going to use cursor almost everywhere. I mean, everywhere means if you have a situation where if you want to perform a looping through a record, cursor is the only option. So cursor is very popular, and that's the reason why you also need to make sure that you need to know how to write the cursor in the most efficient way, because cursor always inherited with performance issues. So make sure that you always use that read only and forward only option to make it effective. Without having any much performance hit.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on cursor? Clear?
Daniel?
Yes.
So this cursor you basically use for record set manipulation, like data comparison, things like that.
Absolutely, yes. So data comparison, it's not limited to data comparison or record manipulation. I mean, very simple, if you want to preload for each record, if you want to perform any kind of task, it can be a data comparison or it can be data manipulation, or for each record, if you want to do some kind of a calculation, in all those scenarios, we'll be using the cursor.
Yeah, but we don't use it to do anything with the tables, like updating data there and.
Well, we did that, right? That is what we did.
Yeah, we did that, but if you have a big table, we also talked about there will be a performance issue, right?
Well, yes, of course. If your cursor is built based on tables with a large volume of record, or the cursor itself is extremely large, yes, that is one of the drawback, because if you are trying to load 10 million records into a cursor, we always going to have performance issues, because even if it has been loaded into memory, there's going to be a lot of footprint in the TempDB database too. So a lot of IO operations need to be done behind the scenes. So if you're we don't recommend going for an extremely large cursor, because that's always going to come with a lot of performance issues. But my question is, what is the workaround? Do you have any workaround? Unfortunately, there's no other workaround, so cursor is the only option.
Okay.
All right.
Daniel?
Yes.
Yeah, so the data which these cursors they load, it obviously not gets stored in the memory. It's like for particular connection, but this code will be there, right? This cursor code, so that any other time, like, or with any other connection, if I want to use the same logic, same code to do the same kind of task, I can again open and use the cursor.
Absolutely. Yes.
And fetch data again.
Right.
The code will be there in that.
The code will be there, yes. The code, the code will be there in the sense you need to save that code, and at any point you open that code, execute it again and again, no issues.
Yeah.
The only thing you need to be careful about is when you are creating the cursor, don't forget to close the cursor and particularly
Yes.
deallocate the cursor. If you don't deallocate the cursor, and then if you execute it again, SQL engine will complain that, hey, that memory location is already taken, that there is a cursor with that name already exists. So make sure that you close the cursor and deallocate after it is being used.
Then if you don't deallocate, how long is gonna be like sit there?
As long
Forever?
as, because this variable, each variable is created for that particular connection, right? So when I declare a variable, that
Yeah.
is for that connection. So if I don't deallocate it, it is going to be there until that connection is closed.
Oh, okay.
Hmm?
So even if you don't deallocate, when the connection is ended, then it's gonna go.
Yes, it's going to remain
Okay.
in memory until you close the connection.
Okay.
Daniel,
Yes.
I don't understand the
please
word
go ahead.
connection. Can you please explain the connection? Where are we starting the connection?
Oh, the connection means every time when you are clicking on when you click on the new query window, you are establishing a connection to the database, and each connection has its own SPID. You can see 52, 57. So every time when you are opening a new query window, you are establishing a connection to the SQL Server. When your application, when you're connecting your application to your database, that is also a connection to the database, right? That's what I meant by connection.
Okay, got it.
Mhm.
Daniel, one more quick question.
Yes.
And do you have like concept like a session here? Like if you are ideal, don't doing anything, connection will like expire, anything like that, like in a web application?
No, that's only for the web application. The the session expiration is for web application. Normally, it is going to be in IIS. It is going to be 20 minutes. But in the case of SQL Server, you open the SQL Server management studio here on this machine and leave it for a week, and then come back. That connection is still going to be there unless somebody else, explicitly kill your connection. So there's no session
Oh,
expiration
okay.
date. Once a connection is established, it is going to be there.
I was asking if there is a similar concept like.
No, no.
So, okay.
Okay, I'm going to take a 5 minutes break, guys. So what time is it now? 10:03. Come back at 10:08, and we can get started with start procedures. Okay, 5 minutes break. Be back.
Daniel, I have one question. Hello?
All right, I'm back. Okay, let's start with start procedures. All right, so what is a start procedure? Anybody know anything about start procedures?
It's just a SQL query you want to store if you want to use it again.
Okay.
It's a
Set
precompiled
of
set of
SQL
SQL statements.
Precompiled set of SQL statement. Okay. All right.
stored in the database.
Stored. Yes. First, it's a persistent object. There are different type of. So start procedure is nothing but a block of code. A predefined block of code is what we call as a start procedure. It is going to be precompiled. Those are some of the features of start procedures. So, which are the other predefined block of code objects we have seen in the past? We talked about a couple of them, right?
Function.
Function, user-defined function. Yes, that's also a predefined block of code. Anything else?
View.
View, yes.
View.
Which one? View is right. Triggers, right? Triggers is a classic example of also these are the three things, right? So now, so start procedure is also falls into that category. It is a predefined block of code, but it has its own features. Now, one of the limitation of a user-defined function is user-defined function doesn't support transactions, right? But in the case of a start procedure, inside the start procedure, you can do whatever you want. Any kind of transactional statement, and you can create temporary tables. You can do whatever you want inside a start procedure. So start procedure is nothing but a container. Inside that you can have a predefined list of code. Okay. All right, so let's start with a very simple example with start procedure, and then we talk about how you can pass parameters into start procedure and then receive parameter back from the start procedure. But start procedure, I'm not going to spend too much. I'm not going to write complicated select statements, not select the SQL statements inside the start procedure, because the start procedure is like a medium or a container, and then you can use whatever code you have learned so far inside that start procedure to satisfy your requirement. So let's get started here. If you want to create a start procedure, create procedure. The name of the start procedure, I am going to call it as, let me see. All right, so I'm going to make a simple start procedure here called as human resource dot, or I'm not going to use the human resource. I just say USP get all employees, or even get all employees, and you can provide input parameter, but in this particular start procedure, I'm not going to provide any input parameter. And then after that, I can say as select star from human resource dot employee. This is one of the simplest select statement start procedure you can ever write. So if I execute this, why it's yelling at me?
Might need employee.
All right, so db dot All right, here you go. All right, so if you don't specify any parameters, you don't need to put that bracket there. If you have a parameter, input parameter or output parameter, that's the only time where you want to put a bracket around it. Anyway, so this is a
So
simple.
so far, it's just looking like a view.
Yes, I mean this is not the sort procedure we are going to. You really want to write it because, I mean, if you want to do something like this, this is going to be view, but you are not going to see a start procedure like this. Just want to give you an intro to the start procedure. So this is a simplest start procedure we can ever write. So the syntax for that is create procedure followed by the name of the procedure and then as followed by a select statement. Now, how do I call this start procedure? Because calling the start procedure is very different from the other ones. So if I want to call the start procedure, that you can say execute followed by the name of the start procedure. Here you go. All right. Execute followed by that. Now another version is that you can use the short version of execute, which is going to be exez, and then that will also work. Your personal preference. Okay. Now I have a question. It's an interview certification question too. So this is the output of that start procedure. Can I say, now my question is, you have seen insert with select, right? You have seen insert into followed by a table name, and after that in place of a value you can say select star from another table, right? Insert with select. Have you seen that?
Yes.
Yes. So
Yes.
so my question is, in place of this select statement, can I use a start procedure? Is it a valid syntax?
No.
Answer is yes. If you want to execute, the insert with execute is also a valid syntax. So you can use insert with a select as well as you can use insert with execute. So output of a start procedure can directly be inserted into a persistent table, not an issue. Just want to let you know.
But in this case, it should be the output should be in a tabular format, right?
Yes, it has to. The output always go, yes. It has to be in a tabular format. Yes, because you are inserting into a particular table. Yes.
Excuse me.
That was a side
Then,
note. Yes.
I mean, I was looking for you are working before create procedure in the different query, but you came and execute. I mean, why you different? Are you using different query?
Oh, I just want to, because I don't want to give you. I don't want to execute that. That object. I don't want to call that object from the same connection window. I just want to show you that you can access how you are going to access that from other connections.
So is it the same? I mean, it's the create.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same. I mean, I can execute the same thing in the same connection. I mean, that's if I copy this and then put that in my other connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then
Yeah,
you might think that okay, it can only execute it from this connection. So that's the reason why none of those. Please mute the microphone. None of those examples I execute that from the same connection. I try to do it from a different connection.
So is it the same? I mean, a create procedure in the one you were created, executed.
It's the same. It doesn't matter from which connection you are trying to execute. It is the same.
Yeah, I mean, we can use whether the first one or the second one.
Oh, this one, yeah, you can use the execute or exec. It's your personal preference. You can use either of those.
No, my question is create procedure.
Okay.
Yeah. Or else the execute the one who were created.
No, that's not the same. Here you are trying to create that start procedure. Start procedure is a persistent object. So you are creating the start procedure using the create statement. And now you need to call that start procedure. Like you call the function, you call the view, right? So similarly, you need to call that start procedure. In order to call the start procedure, you need to use either the execute command or the exe command for that. That's the difference.
So if you put select, will it work?
No, select is sort procedure is not cannot be selected. It is always going to be executed.
Well, can we see the stored procedure somewhere stored,
Sure.
like
Yes.
triggers?
Yes, absolutely. So you go to Adventure Work Database and programmabilities. We have a separate folder called as start procedure.
Okay.
If you go inside this, you should see that start procedure I just created called as get all employees, expand it. There's no input parameter. So that's the reason why no parameters are listed, but this is what it is. Mhm.
When you create a stored procedure, what happens in the database?
When I create a start procedure, I did not hear the second part. When I create a
Okay, what happens? What does that do to the database?
it is going to create a persistent object. When you create a start procedure, it is going to create a persistent object with that particular name under the start procedure. It's like a
And then
view.
in that,
It's like a function. When you're creating a function, what would happen? You nothing will happen. Just create a function, and then later a calling program can call that function.
okay.
Daniel,
Yes.
under the parameters, it says returns integer. It's not returning anything here.
It is not. We will talk about what is this return integer is. I mean, by default, it is going to return an integer. That's a default behavior, but you don't need to specify that. Hold on to that question for next, I would say, 15 minutes. We'll be seeing that. What is
Okay.
this return integer means?
Okay.
All right. So my next requirement is, so this is a simple one, okay? So my next requirement is I want to display all the employees based on their gender. Okay. So I want to call a start procedure and then I want to pass the gender value. So I only want to see those employees with that particular gender. All right. So if I want to do that, I'm going to modify this, or I can create another start procedure called get all employees by gender. And then here I need to pass a parameter. So strgnd gender, it is going to be a car of 1, right? And then use this in the where clause where gender equals whatever that input parameter is. Okay, so I have one. All right, so it has been created. So let's go and call this start procedure with one single parameter here. So if I want to call a start procedure with a parameter, excuse me, C followed by, and then you need to say what that parameter value is going to be. If I want to see all the female employees, so I give the parameter value as F. If I execute this, I see 84 female employees. If I want to see all the male employees, call the result 206 male employees. Let's see going on. Can we do insert into from view or yes? You know function. Yes, I mean if you are using the question is that is it possible to use insert into along with the function? Answer is yes, as long as that function is a inline or multi-statement function, then the output of that can be inserted into a table. View, yeah, absolutely yes, because view, I mentioned that view can be used wherever you can use a regular table. So in that select statement, you say select start from whatever that view is, that put out that view is going to be inserted into that insert statement.
Then can you scroll to the line where you did the creation of this latest procedure?
This one? Okay. Now let's go for two parameters. All right. So what I want is that I want to see employees based on their gender and the marital status. All right. So I'm going to add one more parameter here called as marital status. Maybe I can create a separate another one. Now I'm going to say at str right, and that value is going to be used in the where clause. All right, it is created. Now let's call this pretty lengthy name. Not a big fan of that. XAC, and if the first one is going to be it's going to be gender, and if I want to see all married male employees, then it is going to be M, I guess, right? Married. So if I execute this, it is going to show me we have 97 male employees which are married. Great. Now, if I say, I mean, we already know that which to which input parameter these values are going. I mean, how this value is going to be distributed across two, or which value goes to which variable input or which parameter input parameter? I said M comma M, right?
I think first goes to first and second
Equals.
goes to
First was
second.
the gender and second one was for marital status.
Yes. All right. The first value goes to the gender. So now I'm trying to find all the single male employees. So we have one. So the first value M goes to the gender parameter, and the S goes to the marital status parameter. But that is based on the position, right? This is what we called as positional parameter because.
Excuse me, Daniel. The S stands for what?
Single, I guess.
Oh, single. Okay. I was thinking that, but I just want to confirm.
Okay. So this is what we call as positional parameter because you're not really specifying which value goes to where. It is based on the position of the parameter, right? But another way we can define, this is not an ideal way of providing parameters to a function. The positional parameters are not a recommended choice. What you can do is you can explicitly say which value goes to which parameter. All right. So the first method was explicit listing of positional parameter. You can also say gender equals M, and all right, so this is also a valid syntax. Get the same 109 records. Which one you prefer? The positional one or explicit parameter listing?
Explicit.
Positional one is easy.
Positional one.
Well, the drawback of
Line number 9.
If you have a lot of them,
But
it's
for that you
pretty
should know the
easy.
sequence of the position.
The problem with the positional parameter is that it is less readable, because if you see this, because you created the start procedure, so now you know what is the first parameter and the second parameter. If a third person look at this execute statement, the line number 9, okay, he doesn't have any idea what that M and S means. So he need to go to the definition of the start procedure. So he need to go here, and where is my start procedure? He need to expand it. He expand the parameter. Then only he identify, okay, which value goes to which parameter. So the readability is going to be very less comparing to explicit listing of parameter values. That's one of the reason. Now another reason is, let's say I go and, I mean, everything was working fine. This start procedure get called in so many different places. Everybody happy, it's going to give the right result. Now, at one point, one of my developer decided that he's going to add one more parameter to this particular start procedure. So hold on a second. All right. So if he's adding that addition, the third parameter at the end of that parameter list, everything is fine. Okay, but he decided that he's going to insert a new parameter right in the middle. So let's say the hire date. Oh, let me see. Hire date. Okay, vacation hours. So he's going to add vacation hours. Vacation hours. Oh, show you hours. It is going to be an integer. All right. Now I'm going to alter it. Well, it doesn't, I mean, I can use that. I can say, and vacation hours is greater than whatever parameter you are passing in. Okay. All right. So let's go and alter this. It's altered. Now, what's the problem here? This is going to generate an error because the second value, yes, is going to be assigned to vacation hours. But how about the explicit listing? Still, well, the gender is going to be, M goes to the gender, the S goes to the marital status, but we are not providing any value for the vacation, but that's a different story. But if you are using this method, even if you are rearranging the input parameter at the start procedure level, you explicitly say which value goes to which parameter. And another advantage is that if you are using explicit listing, you do not have to provide the value in the same order. You can say, okay, I'm going to provide the value of the marital status first, and then I'm providing the value for the gender. Doesn't matter. Okay, so explicit listing a parameter is always going to have a lot of advantage comparing to position parameter. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yep.
Daniel, this type of thing we can do in a view also or not?
View doesn't have
Or
support.
function?
View doesn't allow any input parameters, right?
No, no. In function, like if where we pass the values, if we calling the function and then we pass the values, right?
Yes, you cannot do that. The function, well, the parameter has to be, the only thing supported by the function is the positional one. The explicit parameter listing is possible only with the start procedure. It is not supported by the function. The triggers and for the triggers and views, there's no concept of input parameter, so that question is not going to raise there. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have seen how to call a start procedure with input parameter. Okay. Now the next step is I want to show you how you can pass parameter into start procedure, and start procedure can return multiple values back to the calling program. So now let's take a look at how you can pass values into the start procedure and then return values back to the calling program. Oh, I forgot another thing here. Hold on a second. We might go back. I forgot to talk about what is the need of the start procedure. Sorry about that. Okay, let's do a pause on what we were doing. Let's do some theory stuff here. Now,
I have a question.
uh-huh.
We have to set the permission for start procedure, right?
We need to.
We give permission with the database, right?
Yes, you're asking me, do we need to provide permission for the person who
Start
is.
procedure.
Yes, you need to have permission. You need to when you create a start procedure. Well, that doesn't mean that that start procedure can be executed by everybody. So you need to give, it depends on what kind of privilege a user has. If a user is having, if I hire a report developer, then most likely I'll be giving him privilege to execute the start procedure, but he might not have a privilege to modify or alter or drop the start procedure. Is that what you asked me?
No, like those kind of privileges we normally give it to the properties or somewhere. But like for procedures, I've seen like I forget the keyword what we used actually, but I've seen people giving permissions in order to use this procedure to run a report or for certain other process.
Certain privileges needed, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So that's, I mean, if I created a bunch of start procedures, same thing. I mean, if I, let's say as a DB, I created a bunch of start procedures for a HR department, okay, and then a finance guy cannot run those start procedures because I am not giving him privilege to execute those start procedures, which is developed for HR department. So in order to execute a start procedure, you need to have privilege to execute that start procedure. Not anybody can come and execute that start procedure. So you need to have explicit privilege to execute a certain list of start procedures. Is that what you asked me?
Let me check and I'll get back to you.
Yeah. If you can give me a screenshot, that would be great. Right.
Sure, yeah.
All right. So what is the role of a start procedure? So I mentioned that start procedure is a block of code. The two examples we've seen is not a block of code. It is just like a one single select statement. But as we move on, we'll be seeing more start procedures. Now, the purpose of the start procedure is, let's say I want to, the same example, I want to increase the salary of, I want to increase the vacation hours of employees based on their current vacation hours. So if the current vacation hour is less than 15, I want to increase the salary, the vacation hours by 3. If it is 15 to 20, increase it by 2, greater than 20, increase it by 1. Okay, so if you want to do something like that with a 3 update statement, now if I am calling I want to perform this task from my application. When I say application, I'm talking about any kind of .NET application or Java, whichever language it is being written. So if you want to perform that kind of an action, you need to execute how many minimum statements you need to execute if you want to update the vacation hours of employees based on 3 different categories? Well, you need to have 3 update statements, right? Plus, you need to have a begin transaction statement and a commit transaction statement, assuming that we are not using any try catch. Try catch is not in the picture. So 5 statements need to be executed from your application. So the application first execute the begin transaction. So that statement will be transferred to the database. Database execute that and start a transaction. Then it is going to execute, the application is going to send out the first update statement that is sent to the database. Database perform the update statement, and then information about that update is going to be returned back to the calling program. Then it is going to execute the second update. Then it is going to execute. So you can see all this, back and forth traffic happening between your application and the database. That's going to increase the network traffic. So if you want to reduce the client server traffic, not the net or client server traffic, start procedure is the best way to go, because you create a start procedure. Inside that start procedure, you have the begin transaction, commit transaction. In between, you have all the 3 update statement. So you have a start procedure which consists of all these 5 statements, and then kept as part of the database. And if my application want to execute that, just call that start procedure. Instead of sending each statement across the client server, you can just call that start procedure. The start procedure already have all the code needed to implement that logic. So SQL engine will execute that start procedure and return the value back to the calling program. So that is what reducing the client server traffic. Instead of keep on sending back and forth various SQL statements and its result, you put everything into the start procedure and just call the start procedure. Everything will be done in one back and forth traffic. Clear? What is the reduced client server traffic?
Yes.
Okay, need some answer to motivate myself. Grant, she means execute. Yeah, I mean, that's what, yes, Yusuf, that's what I say. I mean, you need to grant the privileges, yes. I didn't want to explicitly say grant because we haven't talked about the security. All right, so efficient reuse of the code and programming. So this is true for any kind of block of code. We talk about the same advantage when we talk about functions, views, code reusability, right? Code reusability is also a main advantage of going for start procedure. The most important one is precompiled execution plan. What is this precompiled execution plan? Anyone?
It will set the execution time.
It's compiled and ready to use.
Compiled and ready to use. Okay.
It's in the memory.
It is
How the procedure will be used. Will get executed.
Executed. Okay. All right. So we need to have another discussion in order to really understand what that precompiled execution plan is. So let's do a quick talk about how SQL Engine really execute a selection. This is something we will discuss in the DBA side, but in order to understand that precompiled execution plan, we need this knowledge. So when you execute a statement, forget about start procedure. When you execute a simple select statement or update statement, doesn't matter what kind of statement it is. The way SQL Engine is going to execute is, first it is going to compile that statement, looking for, it's going to parse and compile, looking for any, syntax or anything like that. So it's compiled successfully. It is going to check the memory and see whether there is any already existing execution plan available in memory for this statement so that it can reuse it. Now, what is this execution plan? What is execution plan? Execution plan is the plan of attack. So I always compare execution plan to the GPS, the map, GPS system. So if you want to go from let's say New York to Washington DC. So you take your GPS and then punch in your destination. The GPS will evaluate various routes and then came up with the best route possible, and then you will save that. That is going to be in the memory of the GPS, and then you will use it. So let's say after 2 weeks you want to go to Washington DC again, same address. Are you going to search for the route, or you are going to reuse whatever route you used in the previous time, the first trip? You are going to reuse it, right?
Reuse.
Reuse it. Same concept here. So we are talking about relational database. So SQL Engine can retrieve data in so many different ways because it's relational, right? Now, but to identify what is the best way or what is the best route to retrieve data, well, that identify that is going to be an expensive operation. So you don't want the SQL Engine to recreate this execution
Do
plan
it again and again.
again and again. That's right. So it's expensive. So what we will do is that what SQL Engine will do is that first thing when you execute a statement, first thing SQL Engine will check is will check in the memory and see whether there is any execution plan available so it can be reused. If it could not find a reusable execution plan, it will create a brand new one. Okay. So that is what the normal procedure is. And then it is going to, using that execution plan, whether it's already there in memory or it's going to create a brand new one, then using that execution plan, it is going to trying to retrieve whatever data needed. Now, well, we'll be seeing that, how data will be retrieved from the hard, all those things we'll be seeing in the DBA side. Now, so that's a regular procedure. Now, I want to open a file here. Hold on a second, guys. Please mute the microphone. Let me see. Oh, it's not there. Yeah, the file which I'm looking for is not on this PC. I forgot to copy that. All right, how about this? We can wind up the class today because I really need that file to explain what that the precompiled execution plan is. That diagram is very helpful. So we can wind up the class now, and we will start tomorrow with the same topic. What is that precompiled execution plan, and what kind of benefit that precompiled execution plan will give to the start procedure. So that's the first thing we'll be discussing in tomorrow's class. Then we will see how to call a start procedure with some good quality code, passing parameters into the start procedure, and then most importantly, how to retrieve, how to accept values coming back from the start procedure. That's going to be the agenda for tomorrow's class. Sorry about that. I am using a couple of different laptops today, and I forgot to copy that file. So give me a day, it is going to be ready. Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. So that is all for tonight. We will meet again tomorrow at 9 p.m. Okay.
Daniel, you said yesterday that you will upload a trigger lab.
Okay.
Lab of trigger, but you cannot.
Yes. Seems like I didn't do that.
I checked it. It's
okay.
not
Yeah,
there.
I'm pretty sure because after yesterday's class I went straight into